Shout out to Lisa for covering while I'm gone, and shout out to you all for the support while I was off. It really does make a huge difference.
Are you saying all that because your evaluation is going to be talked about? I'm just messing, you know.
Yes.
Thank you, Dr. Burke. I will definitely get us out of here. Let's go. All right. Good evening. We will now call the April 28th meeting of the Ben Lapine School Board of Directors to order. I'd like to introduce our participants this evening. Vice Chair Amy Tatum, Directors Cameron Fisher, Jen Lynch, Ross Tomlin, Shirley Olson, Superintendent Dr. Stephen Cook, Deputy Superintendent Dr. Lisa Burke, and Board Clerk Janet Bojanowski. Director Chadwick is joining us virtually. Hi. And I'm Marcus LeGrand, Chair of the Board. And would everyone now please rise and please remove your hats as we join me in doing the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you all very much. And now we're moving to agenda item number 3, review of the agenda. Dr. Cook, are there any changes to the agenda?
There are no changes to the agenda.
All right, fellow board members, are there any changes to the agenda? All right, hearing no request for changes, we will proceed to the agenda as noticed. And tonight we're going to be doing our work session, and now I'm going to hand it over to Dr. Cook and his team to be able to get us into our work session.
Thank you, Chair LeGrand. In front of you, you have 4 separate documents. And these 4 documents, starting with, first of all, a general board policy that governs, it sets out the governance expectations for the engagement on how the board will be evaluating the superintendent, with modified changes showed up in blue for added language, red for what do you call that, strike through language, and then black for language that it would be recommended to be unchanged. The second document that I would share with you is proposed timeline, that how we, and I want to qualify this before I go into deep detail. If we're going to do all of the things we want to do operationally so that we are establishing at the end of the school year, kind of this exit out of 1 year into an entry plan for a second, for the next upcoming year, we're going to have to make some choices. And so this particular evaluation process was built with this idea of having a starting point happen at the beginning of the school year and aligning that so that the time roughly from about March or so till the end of the school year into the summer is the time to go over superintendent feedback in the evaluation process on the strategic initiatives, on any of the goals that the superintendent set out, and the goals that the board has established in the evaluation process they'd like to see more action on, less action on, changes to, et cetera. And that allows that window of time to build that criteria during that time so that we could hit the ground running in the beginning of the school year. And so if the board is so inclined and wants to adopt this timeline, which we are recommending, we think this is the right timeline to be able to do that, it would require that we modify the superintendent's contract to reflect the evaluative process to align with this particular timeline. And so we'll go over that some more later, but I wanted to qualify that because the very first thing you're going to see is that this sets up a timeline that's kind of March to March, and it makes it the end because we get data points and feedback throughout the year and it doesn't always line up with the way the school year hits. It does create some decisions we're going to have to make. If we choose, like, no, we've got to have this done at the end of the school year, that's fine. That's not problematic. It just means it's going to have flex on the other end. So, okay, that's the second document. The third document that you have on in your stack is the one that's titled Evaluation Criteria, the template. And this lines up with how we see the executive limitations as being a part of, because we're a modified version of policy governance, and I'm going to say this again because I think we can't say this enough, that the reason we call it a Carver's policy governance model, but we're a modified version of that. And the reason I say that we are a modified version of that is that typically the school board and superintendent function with nothing more than executive limitations. We have chosen to do more than that. In fact, we have executive limitations, and we've added a few over time. And we also have policies that establish the governance of the board at the board level too. And most districts that use Carver's model don't also have board policies. All policies live under the procedural side of the operations. And so that's one of the reasons that I believe it's important that we call that out, because when people say, what's a Carver modified policy governance model that's Carver-based? The Carver-based is that you set parameters for the operations that the superintendent shall not fail to demonstrate in the operation of the district, along with the board kind of being in the policy mode as well, which makes us modified in that regard. And so, and you've seen this, the places where we have board policies, very much it creates the dynamic that the board has voice in how that's going to be expected to be delivered in those operations, much in the same way the executive limitations do. And so we have, what do we have, like 13, I think maybe 14 executive limitations, and I think there's about 27, 28 board policies. So that's a little sidebar. I just wanted to qualify that in case that continues to come up. And then you see 3 areas in green, 4 areas in green that are our organizational goals that are always something we report on every single year. And so far, I don't anticipate that those goals will be significantly changing unless you all decide that collectively we want to have that conversation. And then the current agreed upon evidence right now that we have in record for those 4 areas of organizational goals, and that's in that second column. And then the way that we would present this is that the third column is you determine whether or not, from your perspective in the reports that we're giving, whether that's written reports that we present during board meetings, whether that's verbal or presentations we do with you all in board meetings or in work sessions, whether or not that the superintendent has met the criteria established by the board based upon that body of evidence. Okay. And then the last piece on that sheet is any superintendent goals that would be set by the superintendent in dialogue with the board, typically in the area of some type of leadership or advocacy. For example, this year I chose a goal based on communication across the system. And so I would argue that that's a leadership type of goal. And so we've just broadened that to allow for flexibility, since we're establishing the process for board members to come and superintendents to come, that typically would tend to be an area that either the board or the superintendent or collectively they want to establish as a focal point for the superintendent to work on, and then what evidence might be shared and whether or not the board determines in that, based upon that body of evidence, that the superintendent has met the criteria. The fourth document is actually, it is separate. Let's actually go to the fifth document first. Well, this is the annual superintendent self-assessment for performance evaluation. And so one of the things we're going to recommend is 2 parts, is that the superintendent completes a self-evaluation as a part of this process annually, or however often the board chooses to evaluate the superintendent. And that self-evaluation, we're recommending a process in which the different areas that I just mentioned, executive limitations, those are the reports that you'll get all year long. The second area is the organizational goals. You'll be seeing those either through reports annually or either a part of board packets or in presentations in front of you, depending on how board leadership wants to see that package together. The third area is the superintendent's goals, as I just mentioned, the one chosen either by the superintendent or the board to share as a more specific. And then the last thing is overall performance determination. That would be the kind of the summary, if you will, or the executive summary as to how things have gone. One of the things that is going to be a part of, we're going to recommend to be a part of this process is a superintendent's 360, in which the superintendent would be getting feedback from the people most directly able to report on the work of the superintendent. That would be most likely individual board members and probably somewhere along the lines of 15 or so staff that work most directly with the superintendent, using that data to inform the superintendent of what's going well, what's not going so well, what areas could be improved upon, and then using that data to inform the self-evaluation. And then lastly, the fifth document that we think would be best served is to have all of that information provided to the board, and then the board to conduct their evaluation of the superintendent using all those tools, and how that the reports that feed into the executive limitations, the reports that feed into the organizational goals, the executive summary of the superintendent's established goals, and the self-evaluation tool to help the board determine the final evaluation of the superintendent. And so that's a 8-minute overview of everything we put together. We feel like this makes a lot of sense, very open to feedback, and would love to see what you all think. Timelines, you name it, lots of discussion. I do want to bring it back to timeline. This is a substantial change in the timeline. That's going to probably change what, like, for example, some of the reporting recommendations, probably because the reporting is going to be, because it's in different chunks, the way this is written out, probably the executive type reports that we do on performance evaluation types of things would be better served to have a mid-year and a final, probably about 6 months apart. And then the rest of the chunks come as dosages during each monthly board meeting. So I'll stop there. I've talked a lot.
Directors, questions?
So the understanding then is that your contract would be modified to include this process in it, since that's what it says at the beginning of the policy. So.
Yeah, currently the contract I have right now reads that the strategic initiatives and the guidance that the superintendent will receive from the board will come at a certain time, and then the superintendent then replies by, I think, September 1st.
Mm-hmm.
And that would not be pragmatic in this regard. This is, we would want to align those dates so that they match up with the evaluation process.
Mm-hmm.
The idea being superintendent gets the evaluation, the final evaluation from the board with recommended points of feedback and areas to focus on. Those areas of focus are built into the strategic planning process for the next year. The strategic planning process and any other areas that the board and the superintendent agree upon become a part of the next year's focal performance kind of stuff. And then that becomes agreed upon sometime during the summer. We're going to have a board meeting dedicated to, we all agree that this is the area we want to focus on, and we would set the contract dates to match that timeline so that that's all captured.
Director Tomlin, did I answer your question?
Yes.
Okay. I had a question really quick for Director Ellison goes. You said about the performance piece and the strategic initiatives. Are that including SBS 141? Is that going to be included in this part too? Or is that, how you want to say it? Is it something that is already intuitive enough, should already be without being said?
No, that's a fantastic question. I will tell you that where that's going to live is all SB 141 recommendations that are coming from the state and that bill all will live in the evidence of how we are demonstrating whatever we're choosing to attach that to, and that's part of the conversation that we have with you all. Remember, the executive limitations functions as the components of the district that fit that particular expectation, whether it's policies that we are promoting, whether it's how we're going to do nutrition services or how we're going to do transportation. And Senate Bill 141 requires that we demonstrate impact in our learning experience. So in that case, probably most of what they're going to be asking for is growth in student achievement, which is, for us, executive limitation 1.1. So you would see that in the evidence as we provide annually. The one good piece of news is it's going to be very well captured annually. The piece that you're not going to like, that no one's going to like, is the fact that there's going to be some sequencing that doesn't happen. Like our graduation rates always come out 6 months after graduations, and our student achievement data comes out later than that. We'll be able to give our student growth data that we're going to have because of Senate Bill 141 in alignment with our school calendar, so that it makes a lot of sense with regards to that. And so you're going to see us have a lot of, I think, you're going to see us emphasizing our student growth data as a part of Senate Bill 141, whatever method of assessment we choose, that data is going to be the most in tune with the learning cycle that students are going through. Whereas student achievement data, we get in the fall, student achievement tests are in mostly April. We get that data months later. And so there's going to be some sequencing issues that we'll have to manage, and I wish I could fix that, but I don't, that's way out of my pay grade even.
Yeah, I'm glad you bring this up because it is a little like hitching our giddy up here in the sense of that part of Senate Bill 141 requires that we report 3 times to the board. And so, so when you think about just our number of meetings, 3 of those being here's where we are, here's where we are, here's where we are, right? So I guess what's on my mind as I'm sort of thinking out loud is just thinking about perhaps we have a March, like, yes, we report on 1.1, but we also have a interim assessments update. In October, we have a 4.5 plus an interim assessments update, but that it lives in a spot that doesn't like take up the majority of our meetings, but it does hit the space of meeting our requirements, knowing that each year we will have a report on 1.1. And that's where those things would come in like broadly. So there's the reporting that meets Senate Bill 141. It's not necessarily the most kind to sort of match up into all of these pieces. So all of that to say, yes, thank you for bringing that up. That is something that we'll need to consider in here. I do want to draw your attention to a couple of things in this this calendar, proposed calendar. One is that basically this says that in June, in this business meeting, the board is approving the final eval and determining, like, are there any sort of specific things that, hey, this needs to be a focus area as we move into next year. And then your next report on an update of like all the things that we're working on organizationally would be in March, or would be in October rather. You'd have a report in October, and then you'd have the final report in March. So that's different than what you've received this year, which was quarterly reports. I think that's pragmatic in the sense that I don't think a lot of the work that we are doing broadly throughout our district changes every 3 months. It's, so I think a 6-month update is sort of reasonable. But you'll continue to have, as you see here in this upper portion, those specific reports related to each organizational goal will continue throughout the year. But like a broad update is October and March.
So here's my other question to add to that. Is there ways we can use the consent for information or agenda pieces too, but at the same time use work sessions to be able to do that, so you don't have to give us a broad overview 3 times? Like,
Yeah.
we get the gist. We're trying to meet our new timetable and at the same time trying to get our stuff out. So is that reasonable? We would probably have to.
Yeah, I want to speak to that. I think one of the things this board will always have the authority to do, and the way it's currently written right now, it functions through board leadership, which is to set the agenda for the meetings. There are some things that we are required by law to present to you all. There are things that we are required to be accountable to you for evidence thereof. It doesn't necessarily say how that presentation needs to take place. And so that's just like we've dialogued over many times, how that information gets to you is much to the liking of how the board wants to receive that. Whether it's a report that lives in consent, whether it's something that lives in just consent for information as here's where it is, whether it's something that the board is like, we'd like to have people in front of us, we'd like to talk about this, we'd like to learn more, dig into it. And we always have the right to change that process in real time, that the board never does lose the authority to do that. But that idea of remember, the board, like what we're codifying here with this recommendation, if you all are in support of it, is the idea that it's 3 parts and an executive summary. The first part are the reports on the executive limitations. Those can look however you want them to if it's written, because you just want to see it on paper and that's how we're going to present it, that's great. If you want to see it in person and we present, our teams are prepared to present to you all. The organizational goals are taking not a step back, but you'll see this twice a year now in a formal way with engagement with us, plus any kind of engagement that we would do that might look like a written report in other times during the year. Like Lisa just said, we have to report on Senate Bill 141 at least 3 times a year. And then the third piece is that executive summary becomes the kind of last step of the superintendent has now said, here it all is. There you go.
One thing to also consider in terms of the calendar here, and we could not figure out a realistic way to make this work, is that if you are, for example, we come to June and you say to the superintendent, hey, you really need to pay attention to this area, and this area costs a substantial amount of money, we've already gone through our budget process. And so what you need to know is that anything that has kind of monetary strings around it that is put in June really won't be realized for about 18 months. So that's just, we couldn't make those things really match up in terms of our budget process.
Can I add to that before we answer questions on that? I will also say that the board never loses their right to say at any given time, I want to know more about blank. And that's, it doesn't have to live, you know, like the answer is, and I still want us to kind of stick to this idea of what we're focusing on is what's captured in the feedback and the strategic priorities and the plan that we make for the year. But if all of a sudden we've got a hot spot and the board's like, I want to hear more about chocolate milk or whatever it might be, the board always has that authority and that right to ask for that. And that goes through, if you recall, that goes through the planning calendar and the agenda planning with board leadership. And also I'll call out that, remember, it only takes, even if board leadership's like, no, I don't want to hear that, we've talked enough about chocolate milk, 3 members of the board that agree upon saying we want to talk about chocolate milk have the authority to ask for that, and it will be agendized as soon as reasonably possible. So that's that. I don't want you to feel like we're locking you into a rhythm that you can't get out of.
I appreciate you saying that. I do have reservations about, because it does feel a little locked in that. And there are times where things get kind of in the whirlwind and all of a sudden time goes by and I'm like, wow, we never heard about that in depth, or board leadership doesn't have the 3 folks right then and there. Or, so I guess I would like a little more brainstorming of, and maybe you just said it and that's all that we got, but there are a few ELs that I'm like, I really am fine with that twice a year, no problem. And then there are a few others that I'm like, I really want more than twice a year. How do we make sure that we don't lose track? And we've got to make sure we got 3 in executives or in board leadership, or somebody speaks up and then we have to get those other. It just feels like a little more compounded in effort. And I don't know, is there a possibility that we could select a couple of ELs and be like, yeah, we want to add that for sure going forward with additional.
There's nothing standing in the way of you all deciding that to go. I will tell you that this is my 8th year as a superintendent. I don't know. It's a lot of years of doing these kinds of things. It changes based upon the needs of the community, changes every year based upon the wants and the needs of the board members. And so what I would caution you to, there's nothing that precludes you from doing that at any time, asking for those things. There's nothing that what I would tell you is the best, most effective use of that tool is good board communication, perhaps some planning that the board speaks about what their priorities are that live within the things that we're asking the system to respond to, and then figuring out what it is that we want, whether that's in a retreat or whether that's in real time just through conversations that we have. We are always amenable to those conversations, and we sit in with the chair and the vice chair when it comes time to make those. And now the process of having a third board member join so that we're never breaking a quorum rule. And rotating that when we do agenda planning, I think is a very transparent approach, and I commend the board for doing that. I think it's very balanced and very meaningful, elevates voices, and it gives an opportunity for shared leadership. I think you would be hard pressed to find a way to add some things that are a priority today that are going to be a priority 12 months from now, and that capturing that in the process is going to be challenging unless it is specific to something like 1.1 or something that is.
Yeah,
I was
mission
gonna say
driven.
academic excellence
Yeah.
is always,
I mean, I
yeah.
do feel like there's a couple, and I don't know, I guess I would propose to leadership of whether it's we mark it on a calendar, that we make sure to check in with everybody during this round of board leadership, that this is a check-in time, take a poll, any additional information set, presentation or check-in or report that everybody's looking for, so we don't lose sight of that as being an opportunity, because it doesn't come up, in my experience in board leadership, of like, hey, anybody want to add anything?
I want to challenge, remember, we use board leadership very intentionally to talk about operational issues and not the work of the board, because there's some slippery slope we got to stay out of in that. And so the board leadership will typically be, here's what's going on in the district right now that we want you to be aware of, because we can have those conversations all day long. When it becomes the actions of the board, that's going to be your all's responsibility to communicate with each other.
No, I understand that. I'm
Okay.
just saying, literally, the three folks to say, hey, we want to add that. I guess I'm wondering if we could have some way that leadership could circle back and to make sure we do a check-in. Is that?
Do you think that's outside of agenda planning? Because, when you attend agenda planning,
Right, you
you
only-
see kind of the list. But isn't it all published now too on Board Book?
Yeah.
Future of what's coming? So any board member could look at it at any time and see if we're not addressing something that they want to address, and then bring it to board leadership to see about adding it to the agenda.
So I want to make sure anybody listening and Kina hears exactly what that engagement was, is that all of this will be available in Board Book for every board member at any given time they want to look. So the proposed calendar for the year, the proposed topics, plus the things that we must also legally, we're bound to do, and the different things that come up, like appeals and things like that, that the board is going to be responsible for, that will always be accessible. And we want to promote that level of transparency. And we also want to make it as user-friendly as possible, because the last thing we want, I think, to your point, Cameron, is the idea of the work getting in the way of hearing things that we want to be out there talking about.
Yes, or people losing track that they can request that. And so I guess it's also my responsibility to, keep up with the agenda, and also rally my three, or to add that. It just, now compressing down to two does add that extra step. And so I'm just voicing that.
I want to say too, I think we're using board leadership in two different terms. So if you have an agenda item that you want to bring, you take it to your board leadership, that's your chair and your vice chair, not to a meeting that we're calling a board leadership meeting.
Yes. Thank you.
Yeah.
So my question, can you talk about what the organization goals, what those evidence, how you're going to present that evidence to us in like a trackable way?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think part of it is similar to what we've done this year. So we have this trackable component, well, that is like for the past 3 years, we show information related to each of these pieces. What we haven't shown, because we haven't had the mechanism that's obvious to do that, is active growth for the first 2 of the 13 things here. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 4, 12. Yeah, the 12 things here. So 2 of these 12 would be shown in a different way that's a little bit more related to growth, specifically around reading and mathematics.
But wouldn't you also want to be reporting a specific data on 9th grade on track, graduation rates, regular attenders? Like there are more
All
than
of
just
those
those
will be
2.
reported on.
Okay,
Yeah.
and reported on in measurable, trackable data, so we can see growth over time.
Yeah, so, but as I say that, we have given that to you all this year. And if that is not meeting the mark for what you are looking for, then we need to have a conversation here about the mechanism that you're hoping to see during that time. Because to my knowledge, we've been doing that.
I think for me, I'll speak for myself. Like the mechanism in which you've been providing that has been helpful, like in the moment. And I think what would be, or like in any given space and time when you provide that to us, but would be helpful is to be able to see like the trajectory of that progress. And I don't know how you do that.
So say a couple more sentences about that.
I'm just trying to think without it being maybe like quantitative data that's shared with us. I think it's challenging to track the improvement from one time to another. I'm curious if anyone else feels similarly.
So
You know,
let,
it is there. So like this spreadsheet, you know, we agreed to like an Excel spreadsheet and it was blank and now it's got numbers in it. Like it's all there and you can see year over year what's happening to, you know, third grade reading as measured by OSAS in November for all students for the last 3 school years. Like it's all there and you can absolutely see trajectory. I guess back to your question, like, do you think we are doing an adequate job of communicating what we hope that number to be, or what we hope will happen to that number in subsequent years?
so the first thing I want to say to that is, out of 12, 13 data points, not all of them should be talked about the same way, because they're different types of data points. And part of what I would want for this group to kind of clarify is, for example, what I think you're wanting to see is something like, here's our 10-year longitudinal graduation rates for the last 10 years. Here's how those students have progressed, or how the system has progressed in graduating students more over time. I think the students participating in CTE programs, or the students that are graduating or that are taking at least one AP course and things like that, that's relatively new data that is not necessarily dependent on student performance, because every year it's a brand new group of students and those students may choose more. It might be evidence. I'm not sure we could take credit if this year we had 10% increase in the number of students that took AP courses, or is that because there was interest? And so I think we need to be careful on how we're attributing the evidence and whether or not that evidence is an example. Some of these, absolutely. Like, you've heard me say this before. We'll talk about this, I think, many, many times. The idea of saying 57% of our third graders are proficient at reading this year, and last year 56% were. Those are 2 different populations of students. And so does that mean that we were 1% better? Part of what we're a little bit excited, I'm excited, I don't want to speak for anybody else. I'm excited about the fact with Senate Bill 141, we're going to now be able to look at the growth of cohorts of students over time, which is better evidence of the impact of the system, rather than saying, you know, this person lost 12 pounds, this person lost 14 pounds, so this person's 2% better than that person in weight loss. And I think that's part of what I would want this board to consider, is which of these evidentiary points are cohort related, which of them are just, it's just a moment in time, we want to know how it's going, and which ones, how do we talk about those in 2 different sets of words, so.
Yeah, but that's exactly it. We've been talking about the data, and then we've heard, well, we need cohort, and so this seems like the opportunity where we're finally going to get trackable cohort data, and that's what I want to see.
Yeah, maybe. So third grade reading, you know, the state would say that is in fact evidence of a system at work, if most kids have been in that system since kindergarten. So you've had 3 years plus to get them to a point, and the state's has said they have a long-term goal of 80% proficiency. Like we could make something up, but we also have something from the state that is a target. And the target isn't grow the class of 2029 to an 80% proficiency by the time they're in 8th grade. It's 80% at 3rd grade. Like that's their target. And I like to think that they came up with that from a place of you know,
And that is.
Expertise, I
That
guess.
is, it's changing a little bit, but to your point, we will have a target that will be, like Ben Lapine would need to hit this target. So those are things that would be set forth by the state that we can put in here
I
as
guess
a,
that's back
like
to
a
my
buoy.
question of 5 minutes ago is, are we communicating effectively like what we, and maybe we just need like 5 more minutes to talk about it, but you know, we didn't, this year we've set a goal and it said, strong academic core, measure 3rd grade reading. And it doesn't say 3rd grade reading at 80%, which is the state's long-term goal, or 3rd grade reading at, you know, 10% higher than last year, which is like another way of doing that. Like, we just didn't say it. So are we, you know, is it enough, I guess? Are we doing a good enough job that you can assume based on these metrics what we want to see happen, or do we need to do a better job writing them down?
Wow, that's a great, what I think is probably important is for a level of common guidance and understanding about what this board desires. You know, for example, the idea that that 80, like that's Smarter Balance. I think there's 17 states that use Smarter Balance as a tool for measuring student performance. And what I don't want to get into is in the nitty gritty of what is a statistically relevant improvement. I think what this board just needs to decide is what is it that they're willing to accept as a evidence of improvement. And you know, we talk about this all the time. Kids don't come to kindergarten the same way. It's not the same kind of work for some of our schools as it is for other of our schools. And so our job as district leaders is to do the best we can with every student that walks through the door and to present that to you in a like, here's a data package that shows how we've delivered upon those. And so it's fair, it's reasonable. I think the question becomes, how do you go from here's evidence to, like, we're going to wind up in the same spot at some point going, well, was that enough? And, you know, the argument is any kid that's not above grade level or at least at grade level, is that acceptable? And I think we would all say we want every kid above that. And so the determination is, does the system still need to improve, but do you decide that our superintendent is doing a good job of moving the system while the system is still improving? And I think that's part of what this process is, and I think it's to the root of your question, Director Lynch, is how do we as a group agree with, well, then why not 100%, right? Like, then are you going to say, well, then we need to fire our superintendent because they got 96%, right? Like, and I know that's ridiculous, but that's the point still is valid.
It also is, as we outlined in the timeline, that may be a conversation that happens during the June board business meeting, where the board and the superintendent are developing the criteria for the next evaluation cycle, so that also doesn't remain stagnant and that adapts to what we've seen as sort of what are the inputs and then what we decide. One of, just as a sidebar, one of the interesting conversations that's happening across the state right now is that as part of Senate Bill 141, they've put forth this idea that, you know, now 8th grade math is one of our reporting targets, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so for all of these areas, 3rd grade reading, 8th grade math, et cetera, there are targets that the state is setting. Well, the state is setting double the target for anything else as for math. So math needs to grow at double the rate of anything else, but we're not being, you know, given any sort of funding or supports or systematic framework or instructional ideology or anything around that. And so that's something that really has been a really deep conversation to say, wait a second, you're setting a mark of we need to double our outcomes in this one area. We need to make these specific outcomes in all of these others, but we need to double that outcome in this one area because we've performed lower in that area. But there's no resources that are coming with that. So that just is an interesting, I think that's just sort of indicative of where we are often in education, is that do we set double the goal because we're further behind? Even that as a statement is like, Maybe if that comes with very specific like resources and we're pumping things into that specifically. Maybe not if we want that to improve as much as we want other things that we are also working on to improve. So that's not a helpful answer, but I'm just saying that that's a very broad scale look at the way these targets are set, for example.
I have a question too about the, I've forgotten exactly what they call it, but now that we are in a group of districts with set criteria.
Right.
And that we will be measured against those folks, right? That criteria, has it changed? We saw one document that talked about, what's the criteria for designing these groups? Do we know anything more about that? Because here's my concern. Yeah, we may want to double our growth in math. Here's another question. Is everybody doing 8th grade algebra now? Is that 8th grade math test gonna be algebra, or is it gonna be something else that it's always been? How's that?
Let me take that one on. I will tell you, like, remember what the state is doing right now in what Director Olson is asking, is that there is this subdivision of the districts, of the 197 districts, into what they're grouping as like districts, similar districts. And then those districts will be held accountable because those districts were grouped based upon some criteria that seemed pretty valid and some that was a little less like, okay, that's weird. But basically, these are the similar districts that we're in. And there's 10 large districts in the state that we're grouped with, things like Westland, Wilsonville, and others that are, you might call group one, the largest districts in the state. That there's two divisions that are kind of this top group. One is the higher poverty districts, that would be Salem-Keizer, and then there are the larger districts that are considered the less poverty districts, like Portland Public Schools and Bella Pine Schools, Westland, Wilsonville, et cetera. And so then what it is it's like if you're a runner, then now you're in a group that they think you should perform about the same in that group. And so we're going to group you, and then you'd better do better than the most of your group. And that's the level. And so I understand why they're doing it. It is kind of a communal pressure that is right for kids, I think, in some regards. I think when you start to compare districts, that this district is better than that district, then you're going to lose the validity of the argument in that regards, because quite frankly, we're not all the same, nor do we have all the same kinds of circumstances. And quite frankly, it's a tool to prevent just the state from focusing on the highest poverty districts in the state out of 197 districts. Remember, Culver sits about in the middle as far as size-wise. It's about the median-sized district, if that gives you some perspective.
High Desert Middle School.
They have about 700 students, I believe, and that puts them at about the 50th percentile in size. And so if they hadn't done something like this, most districts in the state would have never even gotten a poke from the state, which I think is a not unreasonable thing for us to expect. However, it does create a kind of false sense of comparison that I want you to be mindful and aware of.
But don't forget the funding implications behind some of that, though. That's the
Just
sad
as an
part.
aside, these are our cohort groupings. So Ben Lapine, Eugene, Greater Albany, Portland, Springfield, Tigard, and Westland.
And we are one of 2 without a local option levy.
I was just about to say that.
We always got to implement that.
But also to Director Lynch's point earlier, I think in terms of like having a goal, as the board is evaluating the superintendent, I think it would be I think it would almost create some sort of control mechanism to measure that improvement. And the other piece that comes to mind for me is when the legislation is like, okay, well, show me how much y'all have improved over the years, because you're asking for more money. And I know we all know that it's not as simple as that. And I do wonder if, like, setting some sort of quantitative um, mark measurement, if that would be helpful in both of those cases, evaluating the superintendent and also, when we do request funds, we are able to show, um, improvement in different areas.
I think we can show improvement. I think that us setting a goal is not what causes us to show improvement. I think we can show improvement agnostic of a goal, and I'm not against us setting a goal. I think that's part of that June session, if that makes sense for, y'all to say, hey, I want this to be 1 number higher or 5 numbers higher or whatever that is. But if we're worried about showing growth, that's different. That's a different conversation than did we set a goal. I mean, our goal, because there's nobody on my team who's shown up each day given their like D game. They are focused on a goal. Their goal is to have kids reading and having doors open for kids while they leave high school. So we're not, I don't know, sort of challenged by not having a specific number. And if that is what this board would like to have specifically for each measurement, great. I do think that's part of what has been important about so for example, in organizational goal 1, that is made up of 4 pieces of evidence. 3 of them are quantitative in nature, and 1 of them is all about our inputs. And so then the outcome of that is for a board member to say, did the superintendent demonstrate that they made reasonable progress to the goal? And it's not they did in one and they didn't in another. It is that here's all the evidence that I'm considering, and I'm making a determination as to, yep, they've moved the needle, or no, they have not. And so your challenge will be to create sort of this aggregate statement, or a statement based on an aggregate of information that includes both quantitative and qualitative information about our system.
Yeah, I was concerned at first with the term reasonable progress, just because I like numbers and I like set goals, and it seemed like that's much more clean. But I think after talking through all this and seeing the complexity and how many things can go so many different ways, and I believe reasonable progress makes a lot of sense for us to use that term, and that we can figure that out.
Yeah, no,
I
and
guess-
sorry, Kina, go. Sorry.
No, I was just gonna say that, like, it's been several years now where, I guess the board, in its various formations, right? We've talked several years about measurable metrics, like seeing metrics, and so we can also share with our constituents, this is the growth, this is the improvement that we've been making over time. It's obviously not up to one person to decide how we're going to show that progress, but I think what would be helpful is if we are all on the same page, and if we agree that, like, yes, this, we're going to produce some sort of executive summary of the superintendent's evaluation, great. Or if we are going to try to hit some sort of metric, but I think what would be helpful for me is to clearly know which way we're going, and if it is a hybrid, fine. But yeah, just, I guess, are we kind of switching gears a little bit in terms of metrics not necessarily being as a critical piece as we had been wanting it to be for a few years now?
I am a little bit concerned about this statement that you made right now, just because I don't feel like we are changing anything related to what we are measuring. So hearing that that maybe your perception is that we're making a change, makes me feel like we have not been clear in some way. And so I'm wondering, like, what feels unclear? I guess when I see all of our evidence that we are suggesting right now is the exact same evidence that we've had all year, and things that to some degree we've reported on in past years as well, is not, I guess I'm wondering where the change that you see happening, where is that?
Let me, here's what I anticipate is going to be the place where the board might start looking at each other and going, so now what? When you look at just those bullets under the organizational goals specifically, when you look, and you get, believe it or not, some of these EL reports, you get quantifiable data as well. But when you start looking at a bunch of quantifiable data, all of a sudden, and let's say the board has done an exercise as what is acceptable and what's not, and gives some level of criteria on improvement. And all of a sudden, we've got 13, how many of these data points? It looks like about 9 of them are actually numerically have a value of some sort. And let's say 6 of them meet that criteria and 3 of them don't. What then? That's the board's responsibility. You're going to have a lot of quantifiable data. You're going to be able to see longitudinally for the ones that we've had over multiple years. We're now in year 5, I think, for Youth Truth scores. And so you're going to be able to see how schools, how levels have progressed over time. What do you do when you have that data that, I mean, it's going to be super easy if 13 out of 13 have improved, and it's going to be super easy if 13 out of 13 have not improved. The likelihood of those 2 examples being the case are probably small. Right. What are you going to do when not all of them meet exactly? That's the board's decision, and that's the dialogue that we're going to have collectively is you have this evidence now, and we spend a lot of time talking about, well, what is the board's responsibility to communicate their expectations with regards to what does 9 improvements out of 11 mean and 2 things we stagnated on? What does that mean overall in the evaluation? Is that still reasonable or is that unacceptable and you have to do better? You know, that's the question for you all to ponder, I think.
I get what I was gonna say, but part of those questions, I think too, wouldn't they be answered in your self-evaluation? You would be telling us like, yes, we did great on these measures and yeah, and that gives space then for an explanation because, you know, in healthcare, I'm measured on metrics all the time. I get my report of my health, you know, my quality metrics and how many of my patients have their blood pressure goals and their A1C goals and how many have had colon cancer screenings. And, you know, the numbers set for me are set from someone outside. And there are times when, you know, my breast cancer screening dips and I'm like, well, I've offered all of my patients mammograms. They just haven't done them. That's nothing to do with me, but that is the measure, right? And like, I would expect you to be giving us the same type of explanations for when something isn't happening. Why is that?
You know what, go ahead, Cameron.
I was just going to say, Kina, is there a certain area of evidence you feel is lacking or it's something in particular you're looking for?
No, I think, thank you for that question. I think, and let me know if I've like just interpreted something wrong, but I mean I feel back from like Carrie and Shamiko and Melissa days that we have been wanting to have metrics as some sort of benchmark that we can measure to that's easily again that we can like share with, well, 1 that we can measure and 2 that we can share with our constituents in our improvement. But does anyone else remember these conversations?
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yes. And that's my point of wanting like trackable data that we see that's in one place that's easy to locate, you know, not us having to go search through a bunch of strategic initiatives report and trying to piece it together. Like data that we can see the improvements or not improving. And I think the SB, you know, interim assessments are going to give us a lot of that data. So it's just a matter of how that data is built so that we have it. You know, when we were talking about targets earlier and like the 80% target set by the state, fine. As an individual, I'm less concerned with us setting a target. I know that was something like Carrie was like, we should set it at 95%. And I was always like, but that's aspirational and not realistic. And I don't want to set us up for something that like we actually can't likely accomplish. You know, I read something the other day that I was like, that can't be right. But it was like 40% of kids are never going to read effectively. And I was like, that cannot be right. I don't know what the number actually is if you dig into the science of it. I hope it's not 40%. But if it is, and the state is setting a target of 80%, no one's ever going to hit it. So we have to make sure whatever we're doing is reasonable, because I don't want a place where we're telling the system, you didn't do your job, but you didn't do your job because it's not actually possible to do that.
I do think I would like feedback from this board on the way that those quantitative pieces have been, because they are in one place, they are trackable over time, they are, in my mind, easy to access. And so if there is any sort of feeling that they are not, I need to hear that, and I would like to play with some ideas about what could be done differently.
Director Lynch had shared, was it Denver Public Schools and their kind of metrics? And I mean, I don't know that that's exactly where we want to go,
No.
but something that's visually easy to look at, that you, like a dashboard that you can click on, that'll show it.
Yeah, and I think it is there. Is it public facing? Like, not really right now. Like, should it be? I don't know. I feel like us, the seven of us, have no idea what's coming with this SB 141. You know a lot more about what,
Well,
a little more. You know a
let's
little.
see.
Just
Yeah.
a smidge.
I just feel like in 12 months, somebody will have come up with a dashboard that every district is using, and like, probably just gonna end up using
Okay,
it.
so just more of a visual, public-facing component. Great. That's helpful for me to sort of have in my mind. There was one other thing that I wanted to mention, and it was riveting, I'm sure.
So for my thing is, for us as a board, is the definition between intention and ambition, right? How ambitious are we trying to be in terms of trying to set what we want, but what's the intentionality behind it? And I think that's the critical side of it. And as we're starting to look at what's coming our way, we got to look at, hey, these targets for our success in this district have to be something like you just mentioned, reasonable, but at the same time, something we know we all can work with to get information correctly. And I think that's what it boils down. That's what it all boils down to. What we want ambitiously, but at the same time, what is the intent behind trying to make sure we get to that point? So I think all the stuff, Dr. Burke, y'all have been doing a great job of getting us all this stuff. We appreciate it. It's not that we don't. I think, like they were just saying, until we get everybody likes to see the numbers and the improvement pieces and where they were. And if they don't see those things, it's just like me running the 40. Right now I'm running a 7,000, but back in the day it was gonna be a 4 point whatever, but you see what I mean. So, hey, I was 4.2, don't get it twisted. Anyway, so it was like, but at the same time, knowing those things, that's something what everybody's looking at, so.
And can I add that procedurally, what we're talking about is the structure you want this to be done in.
Right.
When we talk about the evaluation, what you're talking about isn't impacted one bit by this procedure. Like the
Right.
procedure itself is what we're setting today. And then we talk about the annual evaluation process within that. And I think it's very reasonable for you to say, we'd really like to see, for example, on a website, a dashboard of where we're at currently, and as those data points come in, we impact those. And that's stuff we can work on, but procedurally tonight, what we're seeing is, does this meet your, I mean, if you look at it from the balcony, does this process meet your expectations and your hopes?
Yeah, I mean, I only brought up the data, and I think other people did, because that was one of my sticking points, is that I want more trackable, measurable data. And so that's in here with this, and it's a matter of operationalizing it so that it meets our expectations of what we want.
And Dr. Burke, before you go, really quick, I'm sorry. Where does the 360 evaluation that we added to the contract come into this piece? Because how does that shift into here as well? Because you remember you said you do a self-evaluation. My thing is, what is the 360 that we're getting ready to possibly, have done? How does that change some of this self-evaluation?
So
piece?
the way that I would see the 360 being most effective is for me to get feedback from folks that are most connected to the work of the superintendent. And that would be you all. I would see that you all have a good viewpoint of how the work of the superintendent impacts the overall system. And all of the people that are closely working with the superintendent. I think there becomes a point of diminishing returns from that about what they perceive a superintendent should be based upon their belief or their understanding. And so I would say there's probably 15 or so, maybe 20 or so people that are close enough to the work of the superintendent that would be of value to providing me that feedback. There comes a point at which now if we did 2,000 people, you're going to get, like, I never see that guy. I don't even know who he is. I hear his wife had a kidney transplant. I don't know. And so there becomes, that's the way I would see it. And then using that to inform the superintendent's self-evaluation, which then gets handed all over to you all. So I can say, here's areas that I'm starting to get feedback that I might not be hitting the mark in. And that's the dialogue that I think would be in service to the evaluative process that informs to you all also what I'm running into. That is, I think, the closest. I've talked with colleagues. They have said that when you go too far beyond that, or if you get like community feedback on that, you start getting variance in the data that is no longer relevant. And so that's the.
No, and when we talked about 360s before, it really is limited to the people who work most closely with you. Like that is the data and the feedback that I think we would be searching for, not going out and having community forums on what they think of you, because most people in the community don't actually know what you do. No offense.
But I think that can be very valuable for us to see that feedback. But I didn't see it written into the process at all. Is there a reason why it's not in there, or could it be inserted where it's going to be part of that process?
Yeah, it was intentional that it was not included. I am absolutely interested in the data. I think it's in best service. Like, as a principal, I did this with my staff and with people in my school community. Like if somebody was a parent that volunteered, or they actually had input to give on my leadership as a principal, that data was there. It was not handed to my supervisor. It was data that was in service to me. I think if the board is interested in seeing that data, I think in the aggregate form, it makes more sense than in, if somebody's got a chip on their shoulder or whatever, or somebody loves me, that's not helpful. What you want out of a 360 is actionable data that informs your practices. And so whether or not that's of use to the board, I would be open to that conversation, but it was not included.
However, the mention could be added to the annual self-assessment that there will be some input from, if you want to call it the 360, or anyway, that the superintendent will have some input from direct reports about what's going well and what's not going well, based on either the executive limitations or the goals or all of the above. So it could just be a statement on this document of the self-assessment that it's either encouraged or it's implied, maybe. Okay.
I agree with that. I think that would be helpful, and it doesn't have to be elaborate.
I don't want to see the data, but I would like to see it
Including something.
included, yes, as a part of the self-evaluation.
Yeah, I think whether it's cabinet or I think having 360 feedback would be really helpful, right? I mean, we work with you and, to a certain degree, but the 360 feedback would give us, I think it would just be so helpful in terms of like, these are the folks who are closest to you, and would also inform us. And so I think that's a great idea. And
I don't want to see the results. I just want to know that it happened, and that it might be referenced somewhere in the self-evaluation.
Yeah, it's like a
And I
broad
wanna see the
comment
data.
of plus delta.
And I'm
or
fine
something.
with it just being encouraged as opposed to,
Okay.
yeah,
Yeah.
I mean,
Well, and one of the conversations at our last work session on this topic was the cadence of it, that it's not something you necessarily would do every year. It might be every 2 or 3 years or 5 years, depending. And yeah, not the first year of a new superintendent, but second or third year. But should that at all be written into our board policy that there is a consideration for a 360, since it doesn't live in our policy? And if that's something that we want to do, should it be codified there? Because it would seem like it should be, if that's part of our process.
And Dr. Burke, you were going to talk. I'm sorry, I interrupted you and Hunter did a whole thing. I'm sorry.
This, we can do at our next session, but in terms of just, I'm back in the measurement zone. And some boards, one way that often quantitative results and otherwise have been reported to boards is kind of a more of a trend conversation. So like a stoplight type of mechanism where it's like trending up, trending flat, trending down, like that type of methodology. So that's one way that we might comment on things that we have this number and how does that relate to former things that's sort of in an upward trajectory versus being really stuck on like, is it one, like, are we about 1 point or are we about 8 points or whatever?
No, and I agree, because to me, it's all about growth. You know, if our kids come in at start of third grade and it's a cohort where they're scoring lower, we're clearly not going to say, well, you're not getting them to the 95th percentile, so I guess that means you failed. If you grow them 5% or 10%, you have done an amazing job, and that should be celebrated. So I'm all about growth, not a hard target.
Yes, and I agree with you. Amy, what I'd like to know, we have redesigned reading, literacy and really good reading. We've pumped a bunch of money in. We got all new curriculum materials. We've been doing PD for 3 years. So what's different? Yeah, that's what that's what I want to know. We're making the change in curricular adoptions. We're moving some things around. We got very conscious of that now. Making some decisions about what we are going to replace and what we're not going to replace and why. Which assessments are we going to be using and why? So the question is, what's the difference? So after we make a change, what's the difference? So I'm not so worried about the quantitative thing, but I am looking to see some kind of evidence that my third grade kids are really rocking it this year. Does that make sense?
And I love that. I saw that at NSBA. That was really, really cool how they did it. A school in New York is doing the same thing. They were like, everyone in the community knows the targets. Like everyone knows it when they come to their thing, when they come to their parent meetings, when they come, everybody knows the dashboard of the piece. And they just did a really good job with the data of looking at absenteeism, all these different pieces. How did they do that and how did they target it from a better perspective? And I think when the whole community knows what your targets are, and so it gives you ability to be able to really get the results you want. Because then people love competition as well, you know, and you know people do not like being last. So this was one of those things I think is going to be a great effort if we all do it correctly as a board, but also as a team to try to get this right. But I want to get back to what we're doing in the first place is the evaluation piece. Is anything on here that we need to change, shift, anything before we move forward? Because I want to make sure that we get that addressed tonight. I know we can talk all this other stuff.
Can I make a recommendation
Yes,
on the
sir.
policy
Go ahead.
page?
Go.
The last blue paragraph on the first, at the bottom of the page, right before the strikeout in red. The sentence, how the superintendent's performance meets the standard for compliance. Instead of a period there, put in comma, including periodic 360 feedback
Okay, I got you. Yeah.
from individuals working closest with the superintendent. And then that way it lives in policy.
Cool.
That's great.
Thank you very much for that.
I do have a comment I'd like to make about the annual reports and the months that they come in. That's a really nice, you know, you kind of start out with, oh, shouldn't 1.1 be first? No, because we don't have any data except from 2 years ago. So this is great. I know you guys massage those to think about when is it appropriate. Does it really matter whether we know about, what's an example? Facilities. We know what's going on now, but we only need to know what's changing and what's going on and what's future. And we don't need to know that 3 times a year.
So you'd be.
Yeah, so all of these executive limitations will be one time per year. Every report will receive an update one time per year, except that we will also have an overall update of everything in March and October. So there will be kind of a broad scale commentary in March and October, but otherwise each EL is only one time per year, unless, to Director Fisher's point, there's something that's very specific that they would like a report on. But that's unlikely to be a report on EL. It's like a report on what's going on here, what's this thing?
So what I'm mostly seeing is facilities and all the ancillary things are gonna be first, and we'll get all the academic stuff in March and February. And I know we'll get some twice, I get it, but you know what I mean? I know that's when we're gonna get the meat of most of those, is probably the beginning of the year, is when we're gonna get a lot of that information, yeah. So it's gonna be pretty cool.
So the only thing on here that I don't love is how we changed the, how we rate the superintendent. I really do like having 4 marks. So we can say like, nope, you're not doing it, you're approaching, you're meeting, or you're exceeding. Because the way that this is just you meet or exceed, or you don't meet. And I like a little bit more variation
Yeah,
there.
I had the same question, why you decided to go from a 4-point scale to a 2-point scale.
I can tell you that because you already have a lot of factors going into kind of, you're taking 4, 5, 6 data points, whether quantitative or qualitative data points, into some kind of rating, it gets a little bit challenging. And so we thought that this made more sense overall. We're not married to it at all. It just seemed a whole lot more easier to go from this to that. Like, how do you take 5 data points now and then say your overall rating is a 4, 3, 2, or 1? Is like,
But-
seems kind of arbitrary and loses
This
that.
is, but this I think is just as arbitrary, and I like a little bit more gray area, because I do want to say, like, if there's something that I don't think you're doing great in, I want to be able to say you're approaching and light a little fire under you, rather than saying you don't meet it. Because that to me is pretty harsh, and it would be a really harsh bar for me to ever say you're not meeting something. But there are every evaluation I've said you're approaching something, and I still want to be able to say you're approaching something, because I don't want to have to say you're not meeting it. And to me, not having approaching means I would have to say you're not meeting it, and that doesn't feel right.
And my kids would be the first ones to chime in and say they are 1, 2, 3, 4ing all day long in all of their classes. And would expect you to be held to a similar rubric, frankly.
Yeah.
And a 4 is exceeding, crushing it.
Well,
Remember?
and I would like to be able to say, you're exceeding, whereas now you're either meeting and exceeding at the same time.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think any of us are going to be thrown off with a 4, keeping the 4.
No, I'd like to keep the 4.
Anything else? All right. All right. Oh, go.
Sorry, I do want to point out, just, we have this listed as February 1st to January 31st. I think that can actually be March 1st to February 28th.
Gotcha.
And the reason that we had it that way was because this turnaround to get to the board, or to the March board meeting as the final, it's like, as you're collecting things, can we really have it turned around? I think we can. So I would be fine with that changing, but
And if I understand that SB 141, that annual report is like February, right? Like, didn't they give you some month? It's like, here's the,
no, 3 times per year
yeah, but
to the
isn't there
board.
like a once a year measure against our cohort? Are they gonna, maybe I read this calendar wrong. I think there's.
maybe.
I
They
think
have a
that-
vision of like a,
I think
Well,
that comes
somebody
out
has some
in the
visions.
fall from the previous year.
so to be sure, it's like a year and a half delayed. Yeah. Yeah.
Anything else?
So the dates are when the data is going to be presented that we're considering with the evaluation.
Yeah, and really, if you think about it, you are considering data in April, May, and June, but it's a little bit, like, that's sort of the time at which the board is doing your summative evaluation and all of those things. You will, though, see a report for 3.1 in April. So that's important to know that that is there.
So why do we need those dates? I guess it's just confusing to me, because we're still starting at the fall and we're finishing the evaluation in June, right?
Yeah, no, that's a great point. I think it has more to do just with the superintendent's contract. Like, what are they evaluated over?
And the way that this doesn't package well when you talk about the dates. And so the data points that we get in May and June will actually be the first data points for the following year. And so the place, this makes a lot of sense, like in theory and the way it'll play out, there will be some places where it's gonna be uncomfortable because it's like, well, that's last year's data. Well, every year we get graduation data, that's last year's data. And so it's not necessarily even accurate to say, well, this year we did a great job on graduation because no, that was last year's data. And so that's the kind of struggle, I think, that we have to some extent that we'd be open to. And I think, like I don't know what you do when you have a first-year superintendent because you're going to be measuring them on whoever was the superintendent last year on their graduation rates, but that's not Steve's problem, so that's.
But the point with the June meeting and taking anything that's come up in any one of those reports or satisfactory or that's the time then to set the targets and the mission for the next year. So
Yeah, that's a
feels to me-
really important point of feedback. I think what we also want to imply and hope that you infer from this presentation tonight is the dialogue that happens from the board to the superintendent about, hey, we feel like you killed it in these 3 areas. We feel like these 3 areas need some attention, and this area needs a lot of attention, as evidenced by blank, 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 blank. That's the important place for leveraging change in the system that I think is going to be really meaningful in this process.
Yeah, and that we aren't at that time changing organizational goals. We aren't really even changing the measurements, really. We're changing some of the things like saying, hey, this is a hot spot. We've got to put some energy into that.
Like half of our kids are failing physics in 9th grade. Then we know
That,
we got to do something.
that might be
about it.
one that we, look at.
Okay, I hate to say that, but literally, we know things pop. And so I think we've got plenty of time within this system to account for this and to decide, do we need a big report or do we just need to know a few things?
And just to be clear, half of our kids are not failing physics.
Yes, I'm
So
sorry.
that's,
That was a bad example.
that was
They
an
haven't even
example.
taken it yet.
Half of our kids are failing drinking chocolate milk every day. That's the statistic we use.
All right. Okay, I'm lactose intolerant. I love chocolate milk though. Anyway, all right. Well, Dr. Burke and Dr. Cook, I appreciate it. Janet as well. Thank you everyone for being here. Appreciate it. Want to open the floor now to our board director's comments, and I'm going to start with Shirley Olson.
I think I've said enough tonight.
Thank you, Director Olson. Director Tomlin.
No comment.
Director Lynch.
Good luck to Summit Robotics Chaos Theory at Worlds, starting on Thursday.
No comment.
No comment.
All right. Well, thank you very much for all y'all being here. Yes. Keena, I'm sorry. Keena, my bad.
Okay. I just wanted to say thank you to our tech crew back there. Y'all are always, just making things accessible to folks, and I appreciate you.
All right, no worries. My board comments are this. I want to thank Dr. Burke. Had a nice conversation with Dr. Burke. I think it was on Friday. Was it Friday for board leadership? Yeah, on Friday. And one thing I really appreciate what Dr. Burke did was she fought really hard for her senior cabinet and what her and Dr. Cook had built. And the one thing they brought to us is that as a board, I think we really need to take a look at a self-evaluation for ourselves, because we need to look at some of the things that we need to improve on as well as a board. And I actually sent y'all all a presentation that has a really good self-evaluation for a board to y'all. And also it talks about team dynamics, being a board, and working with the superintendent and staff. So I think it'd be a great opportunity. We probably don't have to do it before the end of the year, but I think it'd be something we definitely need to take a look at, maybe starting in maybe August, September, to look at what that looks like. And I think that's something we need to definitely do for ourselves as well, because just like we were asking them to do a lot of different things, I think there's some improvements we need to continue to do as well as a board. So I want to, again, thank y'all for being here tonight. Our regularly scheduled board meeting is going to be May 12th. That being said, this meeting is adjourned.